welcome to the session, Social Work Future, Media and Public Perceptions of Social Work, Impact and Change. As I said, a real snappy title, so I'm not sure who came up with that. But anyway, this webinar is an opportunity to reflect and to present perceptions of social work in the media. And hopefully, as we develop through the webinar, we will explore further the media and public perceptions of social work and some suggestions for change. I'm John McGowan. I'm the General Secretary of the Social Workers Union, and it really is a pleasure to chair this webinar session today. I will ask the panel to introduce themselves shortly, and then we'll move on to some questions I have prepared for the panelists. This is an interactive session, so please add your comments to the chat box, which will be to your right, I think, and I'll try and share some of the questions, maybe your thoughts, your opinions with the panel as we progress through the session. Before we start with introductions, a special thank you to the BASWA support team who are working hard behind the scenes skillfully, so hopefully they'll be putting some of your comments up in the chat box to me. So panel, please introduce yourself with some brief introductions, and maybe if you want to start, Ruth, to introduce yourself.
Hello everybody, I'm Ruth Allen, Chief Executive of BASWA. Delighted to be here.
Thanks, Ruth. And Georgiana, would you like to introduce yourself? Georgiana's on mute there.
Apologies, I'm Georgiana. I'm a student and journalist.
Thanks, Georgiana. It's that standard phrase now, isn't it? You're on mute. We should have a special sign for it, but thanks for that. And Shahid, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yes, Shahid Naqvi, I'm editor of Professional Social Work magazine.
Thanks, Shahid. And finally, Simon is a panelist. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, my name's Simon Francis. I'm one of the founders of Campaign Collective, and we also work alongside John and the Social Workers Union on the implementation of their campaign fund.
Thank you, panelists. And so, as I said, the format, I'll ask each panelist a question that I've prepared, and then hopefully we'll have some sort of discussion with the panelists, regarding the question, and I'll look at the comments box as well. So please open up your opinion. So, Ruth, if you don't mind starting, actually. So the first question I've got for you as a panelist is, as an overview, what needs to be done to raise the media profile and public understanding of social workers? So as an overview, what needs to be done to raise the media profile and public understanding of social workers? Over to you, Ruth.
Thanks, John. So this is a real priority area for BASWA and indeed for SWU over the coming years. We've been working on it for a long time, but we also wanted to take advantage of the learning that we got from our celebration of 50 years of BASWA, which gave us a chance to understand and explore where we'd come from. And we found out a lot of interesting things about how our public and media profile had evolved over time. So we now want to work more intensively on taking public and media understanding of social work to a new and better level, because we know it really affects the way that social workers feel about ourselves. And of course, it's important for public trust and for the overall kind of health of the profession. I want to start with what might be a bit surprising, a surprising fact, which is that social workers' perception of public understanding of the profession has been shown consistently in research studies to be much worse than the actuality. So recent studies in England and Scotland show that strong public recognition of social work as an essential service, thinking social workers are generally doing a good job, often under pressure, often under the radar. And also recognition that we get disproportionately bad press on occasions. Now, I think that these largely positive views of social work perhaps come mainly from the contact people have directly with social work and social workers in their everyday lives, perhaps as much or more than it comes from the press and media. So what needs to be done is absolutely to impact on media approaches to social work, but also to think about the other ways that we can change public understanding of social work. I think this more positive than we think research findings suggests there might be a stronger foundation than we might think to build on, working with our allies, champions locally and nationally, rather than thinking that we're just knocking our heads on a brick wall. And that there's overwhelming negativity out there, because that doesn't seem to really be the case. It also means that I think we have to look at ourselves and see if we can perhaps put aside some of our sense of being so misunderstood, sometimes persecuted, which may not really chime with what's happening in the public mind, and focus more on our confidence in speaking out and finding ways to tell our own stories, our narrative, not someone else's. And I think my main agency in my little talk here is that we can and we must use our agency and our skills as a profession and our knowledge to shape new narratives and to shape images in public understanding, and really reject that we just have to be the victims of other people's negative stories about us. A bit about media profile. Other colleagues are going to talk in more detail about media, I know. I would say that coverage in mainstream media is getting better overall. And there are also more social workers who are writing about their experiences, both for sort of mainstream generalist media and for the trade press, if you like. I think we need more platforms to tell stories of what we do to different audiences, to make sure we're not just talking to ourselves and to the friendly outlets, but let's get into some of those outlets which we might think traditionally have been quite hostile. And I think there are some barriers to getting our story out in our own words. And one thing that particularly bothers me is having to persuade employers that it will actually be beneficial if their social workers can speak to the media. Local authorities, there are others as well, but local authorities are often very worried about this. And social workers can get into quite a lot of trouble if they breach local policies. I mean, I would hope that social workers will increasingly have confidence, for instance, to go to their managers and communications departments and discuss how social workers can be enabled to communicate more with the public and through the media. Employers will want social workers to be discreet and diplomatic, but they also shouldn't be afraid of social workers engaging and talking about difficult issues. We need overall to be more open, I think, as a profession, and we need to be able to speak thoughtfully about the challenges and successes in our work. It's a difficult, rewarding, and vital job, and we need to be able to be honest and not silent, and also not sugarcoating the reality. Social media is important in terms of getting out our narrative of who we are and building our sense of who we are in a kind of a public space. Social media, a very mixed beast, as we know, and some people misuse it, as we know. But important also to recognise that social workers have really embraced Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, created some really great communities, and also they're able to have a voice and a dialogue with people inside and outside the profession. So I think it's been an important development. Just putting press and media aside, just my final points are about, I think we can change public understanding also through building on what we do day to day, communicating with people in our locality, building relationships, not only with the people we support directly, but with communities and interest groups, maybe with schools and colleges, local campaigns. I think it's important that the local experience of real social work can be understood by people that we're working with locally. And I think we can make a link between better public understanding of social work with community-oriented social work. So one of the things that we've been talking about in BASWA is how we can build public understanding by communicating more through schools, through community organisations, and by promoting a profession that's more outward and community-facing, willing and able to talk to people about what we do more freely, more often, creating more realistic and rounded impressions of social work through every conversation. And just to finally say, perhaps getting rid of that stereotypical party moment that social workers often describe, not saying you're a social worker when asked what you do at a party. So let's put an end to that. Be proud, speak out.
Thank you, Ruth. That was an excellent overview and a good start to the session. I've noticed you've got one comment there from David Jones. Good afternoon, David. David says, positive points, Ruth. We are not victims. We have positive stories to tell and an audience which is eager to hear from us. So thanks for sharing that, David, and please keep the comments coming in. And Jane, behind the scenes, is asking for anybody to perhaps share, if you can, confidentially if you want, positive stories of social work in the media. So thanks for that, and keep keep your comments going. I'll ask the panelists before we move on to the next question for Georgiana, but panelists, anything you want to add to the question I set for Ruth there about what needs to be done to raise the media profile and public understanding of social work? Anybody want to come in? Just put your hand up. There you go, Shahid.
Yeah, I've given this some thought because I used to work in a press office for, well, I've been a newspaper journalist, and I also worked in a council press office for children's services. So I've seen it from both sides. And I think the point that Ruth made there about social workers being able to speak out and tell their stories and grab hold of the narrative in a way is very important, because that experience there showed me that local authorities are very reluctant to let social workers do that, and also the local politicians as well, very jittery about it because they're fearful of their reputational damage. I think that needs to end, and social workers have to be able to talk about their profession and their role and what they do. And for me, it's something about changing the narrative of what social work is, because it's so often seen through the lens of bad news, isn't it? And that's how it's presented through the media, the tragedies that happen, the bad news stories. And I think it's something about really changing that and grabbing hold of it and proactively almost rebranding social work with a campaign to say this is what social work is. It's not just about child protection and children. It's much more than that. And it's, for me, that's something to do around around protecting people's rights and being alongside them through difficulties and as they navigate their way through life and through society. And the final thing, when I was thinking about this, there's this sort of something tangible for that. I thought could be a kind of credits card sized. It could be the BASWA membership card on the back with a description of what social work is, a very kind of all-encompassing generic thing. And just as a starter for 10, this doesn't need to be the wording, but just for sort of debate really, it could say something like, and it would be something that you would be able to show to service users as well as other professionals who don't really understand what social work is. As a social worker, I'm here to work with you to achieve the better outcomes you want in life, ensure your rights and entitlements are respected, identify risk and protect from harm. And then maybe a little bit more saying we do this through building relationships with a focus on empowerment, promoting human dignity, seeing people as a whole, challenging injustice and discrimination within society, and recognizing diversity. That might be too many words, but it's a succinct description. And I think that would help people, the public, other professionals, even the media, understand the complexity of what social work is.
Thanks, Shahid. Words of wisdom from my favourite editor of my favourite social work magazine. So thank you. Would anybody else like to come in there before we look at Simon, comments?
Yeah, I think what would be building on that as well is sort of looking at how social work recruitment is done and takes place, and sort of thinking about the kind of the budgets that local authorities and others spend with their recruitment advertising, and could that be used in a better way? Is there a way of making those adverts more creative and more impactful in terms of demonstrating the impact that people have? You know, at a national level, you look at recently the social care recruitment campaign that's been ongoing, and you know, similar national campaigns, but you don't see that for social work, partly because of the disparate nature of employers, but then, you know, that's the same with the social care sector. So I think, you know, there could certainly be some parallels drawn with kind of a need for national recruitment campaigns that have that sort of powerful message, but also that all employers need to look at what they do with their recruitment budgets in order to perhaps help with the kind of the public awareness of social work.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And Ruth, a comment there?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that employers generally are getting more creative about how they describe the value of coming to work for them and the great work that social workers can do. I think there's been a shift in that, and not least because actually there's a really good there's a real problem actually with recruitment into many types of roles. So there's been a sort of force of necessity, I think. I think the point also that, you know, she was making about that succinct description, I think we need to think about that. There is something about how we describe succinctly what social workers do, whether it's on the back of a card or wherever it is. I think that is really important as well. And there was a comment in here, actually, couple of comments, and it's about the fact that social work is so much more than local authority social work. So although I totally agree with that, and I'm very conscious of that in BASWA, although I use local authority social work as an example, it's because actually it's largely in local authority social work where people are particularly unable to speak out. Actually, it is often easier in some other contexts, so that's why I used it. But it's absolutely right. The need to communicate the very wide range of roles that social workers take is really important, and we really need to promote that. So there's lots of touch points with people with social work, not just through statutory social work in local authorities.
Thanks, Ruth. And going back to the comments, I think someone's commented about BASWA trying to reach out to soaps and TV with representation. I suppose the difficulty there is that I think a long time ago I consulted on a Scottish TV show and they changed everything that I consulted on. So it's about having a license for that, but also it is very difficult. And somebody else, Ruth, has commented on, maybe you could clarify that, but that BASWA doesn't do membership cards anymore. But I thought that is ongoing, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, no, I think BASWA used to do membership cards, so we haven't done membership cards. I think it's a really good point. All these markers of identity actually are really, really important. So it's interesting that's come up early in this discussion, because it's also a sense of pride, isn't it, as well? Badges, cards, they're not flippant things. They can be really important both for communicating what we do and also for a sense of identity and pride as a profession as well.
Thanks, Ruth. And comment from Deb, who's been doing a lot of good work on neurodiverse social work. And again, I think Deb's made the point that there's been a huge amount of support from the public, being able to share and reflect on the professional identities of social work and neurodiverse social workers. So thanks for your work there, Deb. Georgiana's having some technical problems. You might see her coming in and out. So what I'll do is, Shahid, if you're happy, we'll maybe move on to another question I've got prepared, and we'll come back to Georgiana. I had a question. So Shahid, it's really just your thoughts, really, and I'll open it up to the panel as well, that why has social work been subject to negative media reporting? So what's your strand on that?
I think we've got a classic example in the mainstream media at the moment with the Oscars, haven't we? What is everyone talking about from the Oscars? It's not the fact that a film about deaf people won the best movie, or that legendary director for Francis Coppola got a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's the fact that Chris Rock punched Will Smith punched Chris Rock in the face, and it's bad news. Bad news sells. I mean, I have to admit, first thing I did on my mobile phone this morning was look that up, and like most people did when I heard it on the radio. And all the media platforms will be hosting that because they know people will go to it. That's it's a fact of human nature. So you've got to accept that. I think it's difficult to that is how news works, and it is also how people work. But I do believe that people can see beyond that, and they know that's not the whole story. What you see in the media, there's a world beyond that. But what I did over the weekend was ask people, family and friends who aren't social workers, this question: why do they think social work gets a negative press? And it was quite interesting to get their views. So I'll just quickly run through some of the things that people say, which to me shows a sort of level of understanding of the profession. First one, because when things go wrong, it tends to be catastrophic. People only remember the bad stuff. Another one, no one's interested in the positive things, just the negative and the gossip. Another one asked, doesn't the press give social workers a bad name? I.e., if a child unfortunately comes to harm, it always gets pinned on the social worker, rightly or wrongly. This one's quite thoughtful, I thought. He said, helping kids stay in school, placing in good foster homes, turning around poor situations will never make the news. Horrible stuff of kids dying, etc. when mistakes are made, whether mistakes are made or not, always headlines, always condemnation. In balancing on decisions in serious cases, social workers must have time and resources to consider and act. He also makes the point that we have the world's worst press, and says, by definition, successes cannot be known about, only failures. It's what makes the news that drives public sentiment, and that is fickle to say the least. Another one, basically, whenever there's a child deaf, it's always portrayed as social worker failings. I guess the press see itself as some kind of checks and balance in place. They lay on the pressure to perhaps influence culture change within councils. So that's like the media as a kind of public watchdog in a way. Another one, because we only see the negative outcomes, we don't see the positive things that are being done day in and day out. And this one here, succession of young children killed by neglect or abuse, with social services supposedly warned or already involved, all over the papers and internet, job done. Even though we all know it's much more complicated than that, I'm afraid that's a popular media perception. Obviously, they can't win as they're accused of needlessly separating families on the one hand and then not intervening on the other. So, I mean, there's a level of sympathy there, I think, towards the profession and social workers, but there's also, from just a random selection of people here, that association of social work with child protection and tragedies that happen, these cases, because as I say, that is what they're presented with through the media. And, if that's what you consume, that's what you're going to believe, isn't it? And again, it goes back to breaking that cycle, that narrative, I think, and almost rebranding social work. And as I say, it is something about, for me, stressing the role of social workers, almost these guardians of society in a way, without being superhero about it, but they are the people who are there protecting people's rights, and that includes, within that's children's rights, isn't it? Ensuring they get the outcomes they want in life and supporting them. And I think maybe also we are in an era where perhaps the public is a bit more open to that, and even the media, because we know we all suffered over the pandemic, and we know also that it was people in caring professions that were the frontline, fighters in that war. And the clap for carers, the National Care Day we've just had. So I think there is a growing awareness that, or respect for caring professionals. As I say, it wasn't the bankers and the money makers that were doing the hard work during the last 2 years. So I think that it's a time to capitalise on that. And as I say, just find a way to break that narrative and take ownership and take control of it. I think BASWA is doing this as a campaign, isn't it? Trying to shift that understanding of social work, and but I do think a strong campaign, almost coming out and saying, admitting the public don't really understand us, and now we're going to try and educate the public with a campaign called "This is Social Work," perhaps, and why you're doing it. Be quite open about it, because the public don't understand. It's a very complex profession, and also maybe another thing, someone else mentioned this actually, that perhaps we could run an award for good reporting, good social work reporting in the mainstream media. It could be an award ceremony, but that's quite, or it could just be a certificate that you give to people when you spot good mainstream reporting about social work. So slow drips, I think, can achieve change.
Thank you, Shahid. There's certainly a lot of good food for thought there, and some of that's reflected from the comments. Regarding the points you've been making about the media. I'll maybe ask the panel in a minute to see maybe if there's any comments regarding that question about why social work has been subject to negative media reporting. But just a few points to pick up on the comments. There's some great discussions going on in the chat if anyone wants to access that. Catherine Hitchcock, I quite liked your comment. You said that there is a certain irony in our profession. We have brilliant skills in promoting, enabling, speaking on behalf of and supporting our service users, but seem to fall short at being able to do this on behalf of our own profession. And again, there's a lot of discussion around the membership card and other parts about the negative news. So just keep these points going. It's great to be able to read that. Anyone else want to comment on the question I posed to Shahid about why social work has been subject to negative reporting? Ruth, do you unmute there?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things where looking back a bit into history is quite helpful. Although I'm always looking forward, but actually it is useful to know how narratives around social work's role in and sort of getting blamed for failures in child protection came about, really from the creation of social services departments in the 1970s onwards, and those kind of key moments which have stuck in the public and media's mind about specifically the role of social workers in terrible tragedies that happen, which have to be fully understood, often have a multitude of contributory factors inevitably, and of course ultimately the responsibility lies with the person who's perpetrated the act. But it's interesting how in other countries there is rather less focus on social work as child protection than there is in the UK. I mean, not everywhere, it varies country by country, but the profile of social work as a varied profession in the way that medicine is varied, nursing is varied. People work in a wide range of specialisms, many of them high risk actually, but it's only certain parts of the riskiness and where things are perceived as failing that hit the news. So all sorts of things happen in other parts of social work, as they do in all professions. The successes, the good news stories, the resilience and the kind of struggle that is part and parcel of doing difficult work, as well as its reward. Those things probably come over more from other professions, and other professions I think are less vilified around a particular area of difficult practice than in social work. So I'm agreeing with a lot of what's been said, and I think showing that social work is a varied profession with multiple specialisms is really important.
Thanks, Ruth. And just before I move on to maybe a question to you, Simon, next week, it was an interesting comment from Andrew Gill, who says fly on the wall documentaries have helped in the past to give public a proper sense of what a day's life is like for social workers. And I know Anthony from the BASWA comms team is always looking for opportunities from local authorities, to enable that to happen in that process. So if anyone does have any links, or the team is willing and the managers, then I'm sure Anthony would love to hear from any particular team for that. So just before, any final comments, or are you happy, Simon, if I go into the next question? So the next question would be to you, Simon. It's can you tell us more about the guidance for journalists reporting on social work you've been working on with SWU, and why this is important? So again, can you tell us a bit more about the guidance for journalists reporting on social work you've been working on, and why this is important? So over to you, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, John. And sort of feel I'm sort of going to slightly steal the thunder of the next issue of the magazine that Shahid's putting together, because I think he is going to very kindly go into this in a bit more detail there. So look out for that and to get more information. But it was an idea that really came to the Social Workers Union through its members and through the campaign fund, that there has been quite a number of cases where social workers have been named in the media, and that has led to quite difficult situations arising for those social workers. And because the the reporting has been so negative, it has caused social workers kind of actual direct or indirect harm. And we really the social workers who came with us sort of asked if there was anything we could do about this. And so we've been working with the press regulator, Impress. There are two press regulators. One of those is Impress. And we've been working with them to develop a code for accurate reporting on cases that involve social workers, to try and steer the media down the right path to not only understand more about what the role of social workers is, but also to think and to bear in mind the impact of the reporting on social workers themselves. So we've just drafted the code. It is out for consultation at the moment with organisations that employ social workers, and as I say, there'll be more in publications coming to an inbox or doormat near you soon. But if you do want to get in touch, then please do through Social Workers Union if you'd like to contribute to it. But broadly speaking, the 5 areas that we're asking journalists to think about is the accuracy of their reporting, and to ensure that it is that the role of social workers in any high-profile case or any case is accurately reported, and we've set out some ways that they can do that. We're asking them to consider the risk of harm that their reporting might cause if done badly, and that is by identifying a social worker could lead to harm towards that person or their family or employer. Also respecting the right to privacy of social workers, in that social workers are private individuals that, in a similar way, we've heard parallels with nurses and doctors and in this case, police officers as well. you don't see the police officer making the arrest being the person named in any report on crimes activities. So why should a social worker be named just simply for being the social worker assigned to any particular case? The other thing, which I think is an interesting one, given the discussion that was being had earlier about wanting to encourage more social workers to speak out. One of the things that we are saying in the code is that, generally speaking, however, social workers are not spokespeople. They might be able to represent their own experiences and talk about the experiences of their clients, however, and service users. However, they are not official spokespeople for a service, and that is something that I think in any work going forward needs to be kind of still given as a kind of a dividing line, if you like, between the role of the employer and the role of the social worker. And I think, building on exactly Ruth's point just now, that the media must avoid at all costs portraying the kind of the person to blame for any particular crime as being anyone other than the person who committed that crime. It is not the social worker's fault. It is not the victim's fault that crime was committed, and that is something that the media need to also take care of. So those are the kind of the 5 main principles that we've got in the draft code. And as I say, hopefully we'll get some support from other organisations. One of the things we are looking for, though, and I think this is kind of an appeal really to people watching this and taking part in this discussion, is that if there are any examples that you can remember where you felt that social work was badly reported, then it would be really useful for us to see those and to build those into our response, because we'll then draft a kind of, instead of reporting like this, why don't you report like this? But equally, to Shahid's point, if there are examples which you feel are particularly positive and where the journalists have got it right, then rewarding by praise as well as kind of criticizing and suggesting alternatives is going to be useful as well. So really looking for any examples that people have that we can build into the submission, and hopefully with a fair wind we'll have the code in place in the next couple of months.
Thank you, Simon. And if you want to put your details in the comment box for anybody to send you that, then I'm sure that would be helpful as well, Simon. Shahid and Ruth, do you have anything to sort of build on that? Do that actual feeling around, I suppose, not challenging a regulator, but coming up with with guidance? Do you think that's going to be helpful? Over to you, Ruth.
Yeah, I mean, I think the setting of standards and encouraging good practice is probably absolutely the way to go. Probably maybe more easy to influence than to directly get the regulator to act, because they don't, do they? I mean, we have a press that is enabled to, but tackling them on specific issues. And if something arises where we're really clear that it has breached, and we have raised these issues before, BASWA has raised specific things that we believe breach the regulations or codes of practice. It doesn't usually lead to any significant change. I think encouraging good practice amongst journalists who are interested in this area, it's a bit like that kind of strengths-based approach in a way, and also that thing that I was saying earlier about how there is goodwill and good understanding out there in the public, and there have been moves in the media. So how do we work with journalists and like next generations of journalists to encourage them to do some really investigative journalism into some of the reasons why social work is such a difficult job, because of some, whether it's issues of resourcing or the way that services are organized, or kind of national policies that then cut across our work with around people's rights, for instance. So we should be encouraging journalists to take up those things. I would also say, this might be a bit controversial, I'll be careful how I phrase it, but we can't be too afraid of negative press, because if we're out there and known and have a higher profile and recognised and accountable, there will be times when we have negative press. There will be times when for instance, we've asked for more portrayals of social work in dramas and so on, and we've had some of that. And sometimes it's quite on the money, and often it's really a bit off, a bit out of whack. And I guess that's what doctors and lawyers will also say about the way they get portrayed. but they're more powerful. They have less ground to make up, if you like, about public standing. So we probably feel that misrepresentation more acutely. But if we're more visible and more reported on, in a way for good and ill, then I think we have to be confident as a profession and not let it really undermine us, and hit back when it's appropriate, and also engage positively in real debates about the difficulties of the work, the challenges, when things go wrong, when things go right, and be in the kind of, in the fray, if you like, a bit more of it. I think that's very difficult for individual social workers who feel perhaps working in poor working conditions, overworked, very tired, don't have the resources. But I think certainly as organisations, BASWA, SWU, and indeed other social work organisations need to be representing and supporting social workers kind of in that fray of more visibility. And absolutely trying to shift it towards the positive things that social workers do for society as a whole, as well as for individuals.
Thanks, Ruth. And for any social work students listening, I actually liked how you weaved in the strengths-based approach. So well done getting that in there as well. Simon, did you want to come back there?
Yeah, and just sort of to pick up on sort of I suppose a reality point, and just something also that Andrew's just mentioned in the chat about ensuring that we work with journalists who get it. I think yes, absolutely, but I think the challenge is that with the kind of the under-resourced nature of newsrooms, even the reality is that we will not always be working with journalists who get it, and that a lot of the time reporting on cases that involve social work will be done by somebody who the week before was reporting on bus fare rises, or the week before that on a new wind farm being built. And that actually we kind of have to make and part of the reason behind the code is to make it really clear about how you report on cases that do involve social workers, so that journalists can just quickly look at it, get a sense of what they can and can't, or should and shouldn't do, and that will then improve kind of accuracy amongst those who don't have time to get it because they're working on lots of different other stories at the same time. So I think we just need to think about yes, what we do with the positive journalists and the journalists who do get it, but also we need to make sure that we have got something in place for all journalists, because I think I don't think newspaper news desks are going to get any better staffed. I mean, Shahid, you may know far more about this than I do, but that's certainly something that we're hoping to achieve through this code.
Yeah,
thanks.
I've sort of seen the guide, and I think it's a really, really good idea and a positive thing, because it's tangible, isn't it, as well? It's something else that's tangible that can be sent, particularly, I think, to editors, and then it trickles down from there. Because the reality as well, I think, having worked on newspapers, is that you do want to try and understand these issues, but often they are complicated and it's difficult to find the information, particularly if people are blocking you from getting the information. So if you work with journalists and kind of explain the nuances and the complexities and why bad reporting has an impact, I think they'll understand it. I've always felt there's a kind of it's a shame Georgiana isn't here, because she would be able to have expressed that. She's recently come from journalism, being a sort of journalist, and now is studying to be a social worker. But I've always felt there's a real similarity between the two professions, in that they're both interested in people, both interested in stories. They decided not to go into banking or finance, making loads of money. They care about society, and my experience is most social workers do care, and they particularly care for the underdog and people who have been mistreated, and sometimes that pitches them in their mind against local authorities who wrongly probably they kind of blame when things go wrong because they believe they haven't done their job properly, without fully understanding the complexities and the fact that you can't just go into everyone's house all the time. You've got to balance risks with rights, but I think they would be open to those discussions if they were explained to them.
Thanks, Shahid. Yes, I think Georgiana would have been well placed, and hopefully she might even access the and maybe put a few points in. There's still 15 minutes left, so I think there's some difficulties behind the scenes. Ruth, did you want to come in here before we move on?
Yeah, another point from Catherine Hitchcock, which is really interesting in the comments about whether social workers are particularly exposed with, the publication of names, employer details, and our other professions not held to account in the same way and not as exposed. I think that social workers are exposed, and certainly there are lots of examples where they have been particularly exposed, and it's the social workers who get repeatedly back into the headlines. I think Baby Peter Connolly and Victoria Clambier were two really strong and awful examples of that, where it was the social workers, and they were in several of them were very junior social workers, not long in the profession, very exposed positions with nobody apart from perhaps trade union representative kind of really pushing for them to be seen as caught in a badly operating system, basically, as well as having their own accountabilities. Actually, though, we must remember that we're not the only profession to get vilified. I mean, for instance, in the Baby Peter Connolly case, there was a doctor, a paediatrician, who was from elsewhere in the world. I think that was significant because of the way in which she was vilified, and had a terrible time. And of course, there are regulators for all of these other professions as well. So there's an accountability through regulatory processes when things go wrong. So when it's not that the other professions are completely immune to this, but I do think that social work is overall is not as strong or not as well established, perhaps, or not as well understood in the round as some other professions. So not only do individuals get vilified, but then it kind of washes over the whole profession. It seems to in some of those cases. So I think there is that difference. But I think there is a role for regulators across the UK to be working with the profession around public profile and that balance between ensuring there's accountability and public protection and a recognition of all the great work that is the majority of things that happen in social work encounters, where social workers are doing great jobs. So I think working with regulators is also important in this.
Thanks, Ruth. And I see there's a comment from the talented James Burchell, who's the SWU president, to say that he went from journalism to social work, and it was his experience as a journalist that led him to social work. So there's an interesting point that you've backed it as well, Shahid. So we've got some time left now. It doesn't look like Georgiana unfortunately can join us. So what I'm going to do is I'll maybe ask the panelists to pick on any of the comments. But I suppose to get us going, there was a comment there from David Jones earlier on. It's quite an interesting one. David says, is it difficult to show what social work has achieved? Indeed, we say, look what I've done, but people involved are likely to react negatively. So I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on that. If social workers do go on about what they've achieved, is it a possibility that people involved are likely to react negatively? Anyone wants to go on that? Ruth, you've got your...
Yeah, I'd let my colleagues come in as well, of course, but just on that, I think it is. I think we have to. I think we have to engage in it and tell the story of what we do, and also use the evidence. There is evidence out there about the impact of social work, and we all have a responsibility to understand how what we might be doing in a particular role is informed by evidence, so we can talk about not only the experience of good outcomes with people, but also what the evidence tells us about the difference we make. But the reason I just jumped in actually is what I think is missing on this panel, apart from poor old Georgiana, which I'm very sad, and I hope she does get back in, but is also is the voice of lived experience, because that is where getting feedback from people's experience of using social work services is absolutely crucial. Social work sometimes, quite often, works with people in very difficult circumstances, and sometimes is using powers and authorities to protect one party, and that may be objected to by another party. I'm massively oversimplifying, but those kinds of conflicts of kind of rights and views obviously is part of social work. But actually, there's a huge amount of solidarity and alliance that we build all the time with people we're working with when we work co-productively, when we work respectfully. Baz was doing increasing amounts of that with the involvement of people with lived experience. And so next time we have this discussion, let's have the discussion with people with lived experience of social work, and of various kinds as well. Again, it's not about sugarcoating it, but one of the reasons why, doctors, for instance, tend to have a higher, more positive profile is, although, it can be a very mixed experience seeing a doctor, but there's lots of people who've got a positive story to tell about, they got this or that help, and they can talk about that story. And it's that testimony, that first-hand testimony, that building the availability of that, and that has to be part of changing public understanding.
Thanks, Ruth. And I quite like to comment from Lennox Johnson, where Lennox is saying what's needed is more social workers reporting in national press, or at least commenting on the stories before they're published. And in a way, that relates to Parliament as well. If you've got more social workers actually telling our story, then I suppose in all opportunities it gets stronger. So thanks for that Lennox. What about then? On you go, Simon, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of highlight that sort of co-production thing and sort of social workers speaking out. And another example from the SWU campaign fund is the Food is Care campaign by Dominic Waters, and that's a great example where kind of there's a social worker channeling their experiences and what they're seeing on the ground, and then looking at not only highlighting that issue in the wider media, and it had sort of coverage in the press for that, but also then thinking about how that reflects back on the profession as well. And I think that there is a real case for social workers to campaign on issues in a way similar to that, and similar to how Dominic's been doing. And so I guess, yeah, kind of for people to think, if there is an issue that they feel really passionate about and they want to kind of access and talk more about, then that is something that people should do. And that is that, I think, John, that is one of the points of the SWU campaign fund, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is. So just to recap, if any BASWR and SWU members are looking to develop a campaign, I think there's hopefully somebody on the back staff will put the link in, but you can access and actually get the support to develop that. And it could be just a micro campaign or a macro one. So look forward to that. So thanks for that, Simon. Just another question to the panel then, and Shahid, this might be suited to you as well. Do you think that social work is less visible and less readily praised than other public services in the role?
Probably, yes. I'm not sure of how many other public services are that praised really either. People just see them as public servants, don't they, and expect them to do their job no matter what. So again, will that change? No, we're in a different era, more aware of other people's struggles and suffering. I think there's something about you were talking earlier about service users and them being involved and telling those success stories. There is still some stigma, isn't there, I think, about using social services in the public in the way that there isn't to going to see a doctor. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed and challenged head on, that it shouldn't be a stigma. We all have struggles in life. Life isn't always easy, and sometimes we need help and support, and social workers are the people that are there, hopefully, when you need them. But that needs to be resourced in such a way that they are there when you need them, and people know that they will be supported. So, because when you talk to people who have had help in their lives from social workers, and we all know some, you hear really positive success stories, and that they've made a huge difference. But yeah, breaking that stigma, shifting that narrative again, it's back to that, isn't it, about what social work is, and trying to get people to understand that this should be a universal service in a way that everyone accesses at some point in their life as and when they need it. And it shouldn't be a stigma. Maybe that will change, because, as I said, I think people do, and especially now we're in a cost of living crisis, aren't we, which is affecting more and more people. People are not sort of shying away from being honest about their struggles and suffering so much. But yeah, that's another, I think, area of focus, tackling that stigma.
Thanks, Shahid. And Ruth, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think it's really a very important point, and the fact that social work, as it's developed in this country, very much sits at that boundary between the kind of truly sort of person-led helping on the one hand, and then also intervening the kind of the state's interventions for specific reasons for safeguarding and the welfare of people who are rendered vulnerable by circumstances and so on. And that is different to kind of almost all healthcare, not all, but most of healthcare that people experience, and everybody experiences healthcare, really, most people, almost everybody, in an elective form, in a person driven form, rather than being required. So that's absolutely right, that there is that difference. And I think so one of the things that has to perhaps go hand in hand is as we hopefully are moving towards, for instance, more strengths-based personalized social work, and I think that's moving forward in some areas more than others at the moment, then that also that narrative about personalized support and making that real is something that we need to be able to communicate clearly with the public, and make it something that is really valued and feels really supportive and in a tangible way. We have a lot of jargon in what we do. What is personalized support? How do you turn that into something that really makes sense to somebody who needs some things sorting out and needs some help and wants someone to talk to, and needs some help? How do you make that into something really understandable and not full of jargon? I think that's important. But yeah, the stigma around social work has got many drivers. I think has arisen over many years for a variety of reasons. But I think we need to decide also in our practice development in the profession about how we want to work in more co-productive ways, want to get alongside people, want to be able to help people earlier than perhaps resourcing and policies tend to allow at the moment, so that we can really be there when people are able to work on sorting out their own issues and be really solution focused, rather than becoming in residually when it's all got turned into a crisis. So improving, reducing stigma and improving public understanding does go hand in hand with the development of more enabling earlier help kind of practice, I think. So we can't kind of divorce them.
Thanks, Ruth. And Simon, there's a question there from, it's not a question, it's a comment from Andrew, and thanks for your comments, Andrew. You've got the stories from people with lived experience should be front and centre and focus on outcomes and making a difference in what works. Obviously, your work around Campaign Collective and sort of representing a lot of sort of service user groups, and is there any suggestions that how we can build on that and share experiences, lived experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that the media are always really interested in hearing from are people with lived experience, and with experiences to share. And I think, certainly some of the work that we do on fuel poverty, we get requests every day from the national media wanting to speak to people who can talk about their experiences. And I think that, clearly not only can we help get their voices heard, but also I think that's kind of an interesting point, though, in how that relates back to social workers and how that affects your relationship with the people that you're working with. And kind of without you how much will you be there to support them when they do go and do something in the media, and then kind of how do you help them, because I think we find that people who do take part do find it a positive experience, 99% of the time, They get to have their voices heard. They feel that they're being listened to on a wider scale. They kind of will have worked through what they're going to talk about and how they're going to describe their situation, and that is quite an empowering thing for people to do. Obviously, kind of they might be asked difficult questions when they go and take part in an interview. So how are they best supported through that? So I think it being, I'm not a social worker, so I'd love to kind of have lots of examples of people with stories to tell that we could kind of get into the media. However, I think, as social workers, would you be the right people to suggest that they do that? I think that would potentially kind of be something that you need to reflect on as professionals, as to how much you would feel comfortable saying to people, right, yeah, let's go and talk to the media about your experience, because it will be a positive thing for you potentially.
Thank you, Simon. And we've only got a few minutes left, so maybe it's a good point then if we can all finish on a good positive, and maybe a few ideas then from everyone. That, again, going back to Ruth's first question about what needs to be done to raise the media profile and public understanding of social work, we could all finish on a positive aspect that we could all take away. But and again, the comments have been excellent, and so thank you for that. But we've got another couple of minutes, so Ruth, just as a few points, and we'll go to Shahid then Simon. Actually, what can we do just to emphasize that again?
Yeah, I suppose I would pull out Simon will say this, but I think the work that SWU is doing around standards in the media is really important. I think influencing great journalists, we think they were great journalists who are positively interested in what we're doing, and building those relationships is really important. I think influencing employers, not just local authorities, but all employers, not to have policies in place that are kind of in a blanket way prevent social workers from talking to the media, but supporting good dialogue with media and with communities about the great work that social work does would have a benefit. And I think we need to get more stories of positive social work and the difference that social work does, and clarity about what social work does in mainstream media, not just and beyond the friendly mainstream media, in different kinds of outlets, and describing social work in different ways, in different magazines, different red tops, wherever. We just need to get that positive story out in diverse ways positively.
Thank you, Ruth. Shahid, any final comments about how we can raise the media profile?
Yeah, I think it is these tangible things for a start. The guide, I think, is a tangible thing. That's really good. I think maybe, as we discussed, that an award certificate for good journalists reporting on social work in the mainstream media. The credit card with a good definition of what social work is. These are sort of tangible things, maybe backed by a campaign to take to the wider public and the media about what social work is. I think these things would help.
Thanks, Shahid. And Simon, any final thoughts on how we can influence perceptions?
I get to go last, and everyone's sort of said everything I was going to say, so I just agree with Ruth and Shahid. But also, I think the point that was made earlier about trying to work to get social workers commenting on the issues that they have experience and expertise in, I think is a really important one. And that this is something, again, kind of SWU and VASRA might like to consider is there a social work expert panel that is available for comment on the media issues, and that is pitched out proactively, given media training and support for it, that will then potentially help get the social workers' voice heard on the issues that they are experts on.
Thank you, Simon. And I'd like to thank everyone behind the scenes. I'd like to thank the panelists. And again, hope you've enjoyed it. There's been some really useful comments. And I think for me, it's been a very useful discussion, and hopefully we can take this further. So thank you, BASRA, for presenting this Social Work Future webinar. So thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.